I was a forward observer, and I was assigned to the 7th Division.
Would you please tell me what a forward observer is?
Well, he gets in a position so he can see the enemy, and if he sees the enemy, he can call on the phone or the radio for artillery fire. So my job was to observe. I was in a bunker up on a ridge, top of a ridge, bunkered in, and I had a slot to look out the front. And I had timbers and sandbags all over around me, so I was pretty well solid in the hilltop. And then I could see out in front of me. And then I could call artillery fire in to shoot at whatever I could see any activity. And that was in June or July in 1953. And there was really only 21 days later, and they called a truce. So I only had activity in the war zone for 21 days.
So, but you already were in Korea.
Yes.
Oh.
And the war was winding down, but we were pretty active. There was a battle going on called Pork Chop Hill, and that was just out of my sight to the left. I couldn't see it. I could see the smoke drifting to it, but I was looking over to the right of that, and I could see T-Bone Hill, which was enemy territory, and they were bunkered in and had trenches there. And we would observe that and try to catch some enemy in there. And then we did have a tank pull up on Pork Chop Hill and started shooting on T-Bone and started shooting at Pork Chop Hill. So I called direction and fire into him, and he left immediately when the fire came.
Was your bunker ever fired upon?
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, one day I started to heard a round go off right in front of the bunker, just a few yards ahead. Bang, a big noise, dirt flew up, and I, looking around, I couldn't see where anything came from. So they were shooting from behind a hill at me. They're going to try to close out that bunker. Well, about 15 minutes later, here came another round, and I heard it, and it went right over the top and hit the hill and behind me. 15 minutes later, another one came and hit in front of me. Another 15 minutes, another one behind me. That went on all morning. But they couldn't get that finest adjustment to hit halfway between. There was either one notch was too big and one notch was too little.
Wow, you were lucky.
I thank God for that.
Yes.
They couldn't adjust it. So,
but how did you feel? That must have been frightening to know that they were shooting at you from either side.
When they say there's no atheist in the foxhole.
Aha, I've heard that.
And, it gets down to life and death. You make some commitments of how you're going to live your life if you get out, alive.
Did you?
Yes. And
could you share some of them with us?
Huh?
Could you share one of them with us? Some promise you made to yourself?
Well, you promised to be faithful and go to church and live a life that's not corrupt. So I was already married, and so I had some responsibility there. And we didn't have any children yet. So anyway, but, they couldn't hit me. And I had the other observers around me looking for the gun, too, but they couldn't see it, where it was coming from. It was pretty exciting, though.
Yeah. Pretty scary.
When we first got into Korea, we got to the division headquarters, and they had never been fired on because they were a long ways back from the front. So we slept in a bunker that night. And by golly, they got a whole bunch of rounds came in right into the headquarters complex. And I had a few people that were injured, but nobody was killed. And those of us in the tent, there's nothing to do but sit there and listen to it. And but the next day there were gun holes where the shells had landed and dirt was piled out of it. So there were holes around, and there were two people that were sleeping in a tent together, two soldiers, right next to a big telephone pole there in the headquarters, because it was been there quite a while. And a round came in and landed right beside them and sheared off the telephone pole, and they were able to walk to the medics and get treated for minor wounds. So that was a miracle. But everybody was digging foxholes that next day, because they'd never been fired on before. The next day we were sent up to the battalion, and that night we slept in the fire direction bunker while they were firing at the enemy. So we just slept on the floor there, and we got one round that hit the fire direction bunker, but it had timbers and sandbags all over, and it hit, but one piece of shrapnel fell on the floor right beside me. I was laying in a sleeping bag on the floor, blink, blink, blink. And I picked it up and I saved it for years. It was about 3 inches long piece of shrapnel, but nobody got hurt on that. But there were some damage, injuries in the battery as the gunners were down firing at the enemy, and some of them got hurt as the enemy was firing back at us.
So with the fire direction bunker, you're supposed to see where the firing is coming from? Is that correct?
Well, our artillery, in a battery there are 6 105 howitzers, and they were all in bunkered in with sandbags. They were open on top, of course, so they could shoot. And the fire direction center was bunkered in, so they got the commands from the fire direction center out to the guns.
Okay.
By phone until the phones went out, and the fire direction fellow that was running it, he had to step outside and holler the commands to the guns while the rounds were coming in. Oh. So. But you do what you need to do in a war zone. So anyway, so the next day I was sent up to the division observation post. So that's how I got up on that ridge top. And that was really a prime place to be, because 2 other fellows that came in with me went to Pork Chop Hill and had a terrible experience there. Were sent home with, they called it shell shock then. I think they call it post-traumatic stress system. They were shell shocked after that, but I was fairly safe because I was in one big bunker. But anyway, after 21 days, we'd heard that there was going to be a ceasefire at 10 o'clock at night. So we all were... It started to quiet down about 6 o'clock in the evening. Pretty soon you didn't hear any gunfire. And that was unusual. So it was very quiet. And 10 o'clock, everybody was holding their breath. Is it really going to be a ceasefire? Well, it was, thankfully. And anyway, it was interesting because the enemy was always talking to us by loudspeaker. And they would try to convince us to give up and come over to join them. And they would even tell us what we had for dinner. They had spies. They would tell us, well, I hope you enjoyed your such and such for dinner. And they'd talk to us at night on the loudspeaker. And the next morning after the ceasefire, they had built a big entrance with flags hanging down, and they were broadcasting that this is our last chance for us to get over to freedom.